In the name of God, Creator, pain-bearer, and Spirit of life. Today we come to the most absolute central point of all the various varieties of Christianity. All of them. During the last couple of days, we've shared the story of Jesus' last meal with his friends on Thursday night, and his close followers were there, and a scene we refer to as the Last Supper. And then we read the story of the terrible, brutal events of what we call Good Friday, when Jesus was tried, abused, insulted, tortured, and finally executed in a most unspeakably brutal manner. At least to our 21st century cosseted sensibilities, and they are cosseted sensibilities in our community, I tell you. Perhaps the poor abused people of Ukraine might find these stories less shocking, as they're also being subjected to unspeakable brutality by the Russian invading army. Death and life. We humans have the ability to view life as a glorious gift and spend a lot of our time in giving thanks for it, whilst there are those among us who have little or no regard for the vulnerable beauty and rarity of this planet or the lives of others. The great dualisms are ever with us, ever. The light, the darkness, the beauty, the offensiveness, the love, the hate, the life, the death. Dualisms that surround us at all times. This seems to be the story of humanity, because as we look back down the past centuries, we see in reality we see little of peace and gentle coexistence among peoples of this earth. We see recorded really nothing but wars, insurrections and invasions in conjunction with rapidly advancing technologies designed to make the death of the enemy people that much more swift and efficient. In fact, it's come to the point that humanity, in its madness and its bloodlust, has devised weapons that actually threaten the existence of all life on this wonderful, beautiful, and unique planet. Such madness, and it is madness, is beyond rational comprehension. When I was a child, a couple of years ago, I remember a radio advertisement. There wasn't television in those days. Fancy that, no television. Oh, what would you do with your life? My gosh, no television. Anyway, there was radio. We loved the radio. The wireless, as we called it. And a few people are nodding in agreement. They understand exactly where I am. And there was an advertisement. They had advertisements in those days. There was an advertisement on the radio which exhorted people to take better care on the roads. There were cars. And it concluded with these words: "Death is so permanent." Oh. It made people stop and think, death is so permanent. Well, I suppose would heartily agree with that. And as I understand it, there are no other stories in human history which purport to tell of the reality of a person regaining life after death. It is, quite frankly, unbelievable. It can't happen, can it? Well, it seems it can. And in fact, it did happen. Now, as literal proof, all we have to refer to are these few ancient writings from the 1st century contained within the New Testament, and which are trying to explain the inexplicable. But in addition to the religious treatises, it is also interesting that the Roman Jewish historian Josephus, I think many people have heard of Josephus, maybe some have read Josephus's writings. He mentions Jesus in passing only in passing in one of his secular writings. He was not a follower of Jesus, by the way. He wrote this, and I quote, "And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, that is the Jews, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day." That's Josephus. That's not the gospel. That's not the followers of Jesus. And he goes on to say, "As the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him and the tribe of Christians." Tribe of Christians. I love that phrase, tribe of Christians. "So named from him, are not extinct at this day." There's the proof. If this hadn't happened, they would have been extinct. We would not be here. Anyway, I'll come to that later. There we have a reference from outside the New Testament, from outside Christianity. You could call it the impartial observer. But, and there is a but, a big but, if I may say so. No matter how much of these stories we take as being real history, or how much we take as being fantastic tales written for some religious purpose, one thing stands out. The fact that this story has not just survived, but has exploded from its tiny origins in ancient Palestine to include every continent and every nation of the world. Many have tried to denigrate the originators as ignorant peasants, mere fishermen, uneducated, dreamers perhaps, who yearned with every fibre of their body to see their master and leader again. And so started the oral traditions that later became extant in the letters of Paul and then later again in the Gospels. But if that were true, it seems apparent that this fledgling movement which hatched within the Jewish synagogues would have died out within a couple of generations at best. The historical fact is that it did not. In fact, the opposite is true. It grew it exponentially. It soon expanded from being a small controversial sect within the Jewish faith to whole communities who were outside the Jewish faith, pagans who had followed and worshipped the various gods of that first century Greco-Roman world. The movement became known as the Way of Jesus and grew within the synagogues. It brought tensions between its followers and the so-called Orthodox Jews of the time. Paul spends much of his time in his writings trying to convince people that the newcomers did not need to follow the Jewish cultural customs such as circumcision and food laws. Finally, from about the mid-80s, tensions had become so acrimonious that the people by then known as Christians were being expelled from the synagogues. My point is that to observe the reactions and dedication in the teeth of dire and often deadly opposition from both fellow Jews and Roman authorities against these nascent Christians lends great weight to their story of Christ's resurrection. And that's putting aside for a moment all the writings. You follow what I'm getting at here? You follow what I'm saying? Luke writes, back to the writings. Luke writes the account of Paul's experience of meeting the Christ in his Acts of the Apostles. Paul alludes to the life-changing experience often in his own writings. As a result of this encounter with the living Christ, Paul's life was turned upside down. His life took an abrupt 360-degree turn, and he went from being a man driven by religious fervour, trying to eradicate the followers of Jesus, to his greatest protagonist. There is no doubt that we would not be sitting here in this church today if Paul had not experienced the vital presence of the resurrected Christ. So, for a cold and calculating 21st century realist, fully aware of the scientific advances of the past centuries, I believe that there is ample evidence of Christ's resurrection, both in the potent reactions of his followers of the first century, coupled with their writings. No one could have concocted such a story without it being debunked and proven to be a foolish tale if it had not been true. So true that those who experienced it were prepared to die for its authenticity. It's regrettable that over the past 2 millennia, so much dross has been heaped onto the raw, basic experience of those first century witnesses that it has taken on something of an unbelievable face. So what actually happened on that first Easter morning and in the subsequent times that followed? Well, we'll never really know all the details. But one thing I believe is sure, based on the strength of evidence, both oral and literal, the man Jesus of Nazareth was crucified to death by the Roman army in Jerusalem, but subsequently reappeared to his friends and followers, including Paul of Tarsus, quite some years later. Now, I suppose all this can sound just academic, at best an interesting foray into the past, but I believe we can take more from the story. We can carry the experiences of the first century right along the long, winding road to our own time. So different, another world indeed. But our humanity is the same, and it becomes quite clear that we can also experience the living Christ in our own lives. I believe he comes to us just as he did back then in early times, in love, in forgiveness, filling us with his spirit of peace. Remember, he said this, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you." That's it. That's the glue that holds us together, individually and as a community. It's love. Jesus gave us a glimpse of the Creator's spirit of life that we call God, and it's a beautiful blessing. I pray that we may all rejoice in this awesome revelation of Easter. And I pray that the Lord will be with you, each and every one. Amen.